Hello, I'm Ricky.
And I'm Joe, and this is Season 4, Episode 2 of the Beer and Broadband Podcast, where we talk about beer and wine and mead and all sorts of other things like that. We're also going to talk about technology probably a little bit at some point in time, just not today. This is supposed to come out on the 31st, or 5/31/2021. So, and we're back together again, as we discussed on last podcast. So, we do these back to back, but have no fear, we haven't consumed too much alcohol.
Not yet, at least.
Yeah, we had tiny pours for the last one. But today we're going to get right into the beer and talk about a beer that I brewed. This is the Brewers Best Holiday Ale. It is 8% ABV. I brewed it from a kit, and it's a spiced ale that's supposed to be like a Christmas ale. It's one that I did on the Accidental Brewer, which is the video thing that I'm doing for YouTube. Started out like me and my kid doing it together. Anyways, so I'm gonna let Ricky talk about what he thinks about it, because I've had this one before.
Yeah, it's certainly not bad. It's got a very good level of carbonation, which is a hard thing to do in a home brew if you don't have like a kegging system. So like bottle carb, really good job came into its own there. Little tiny bubbles at the top, big fat bubbles at the bottom. Got some like caramely notes to it, which are really nice. The secondary flavors I'm having a hard time placing. It's like a couple all at once, but it's not offensive. I mean, it's maybe a little bit sour, which might be the intention, but that's really not a bad drinking beer.
So it's for 8%, it's very sippable.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially for being as light as it is, like comparative to you can get to that 8-10% with a lot of like really dark beers that have a lot of like malt in them and a lot of like sugars. So for something a bit lighter, it carries that 8% pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. The first couple of these that I pulled out after 3 weeks of being bottled, I thought, oh, the carbonation's gone off wrong. I even complained about it when we were talking to like some buddies when we were doing D&D and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, but It ended up just needing like an extra 2 weeks, I guess.
Yeah, that can happen sometimes. I've only bottle carbed a couple things, and they say that like give it 2 to 3 weeks, and like I guess at 2 to 3 weeks it is technically carved. Like there are the little tiny fine bubbles in it sometimes. But yeah, I had the same thing. The last thing I bottle carbed that it came out actually okay. It did take like 6-8 weeks to really get carbonated.
So I've got some other things that I'm trying to bottle carb now. Those are meads. I've got like 3 session meads that I've done, and 2 of them I'm bottle carbing.
Okay.
I'm not sure about. Well, actually, I've got 4 that I've done. One's a mango session mead. One's a blueberry, and it's going to have hibiscus in the secondary. So it's a blueberry hibiscus, and then I've got a fruit punch and a capsicumel. I think that's how you pronounce it. My wife told me I was pronouncing it wrong, but it's called Roast Me, and it's a roasted bell pepper.
Oh yeah, I remember you talking about that.
But I was trying to shoot for 7.5% or less. Everything else was like right at 7.5%. If it all goes dry. Anyways, the whole point of what I'm saying is, this is the first one that I've really carbonated that's like turned out quite right. The ginger beers that I've done, and even the stout that I did last year, they didn't end up carbonating as well as this one.
Yeah, I mean it's a really hard thing to do unless you get like a real good process down, and like there's not even one I can tell you. It's just like what works best for you. Because it's not only is it how much sugar is left sort of scenario. It's like how much yeast is in suspension because it still has to trigger back off. Like if your yeast died off, like actually died because of like high acidity or high alcohol content, it's not going to work. It's really finicky. So like when you pull it off, it feels good.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It feels great. I'm super excited about how well this went. One of the things that I'm also really excited about is the flavors that were imparted from spices. So I learned something from this beer, that I can put spices at the end of the boil into the mash, and that will, or the the wort, I guess, at that
Yeah.
point in time. But that will end up making it have residual flavor. So those sour flavors and everything, that's all the spiced mixture that's added to this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this started out with like caramel malt. It's a red, beer. It's not super clear because of some of the stuff that's probably still in suspension there. But the paler malts that you put into it end up with like a redder color. And then when you add the spice at the end, it really like brings out that kind of orange. And I think there was some clove and thyme, I think was in it.
Yeah.
But there was some really interesting spice mixtures that went with this.
Yeah, it's a really nice color. It's like almost like a perfect like burnt caramel.
Yeah. And it's got some nice caramel flavors and things like that. I'm really proud of how this one turned out. I was a little disappointed when it didn't carbonate the way I wanted it to. And then when it kicked off and it carbonated, and like I got like I think I drank it the third or fourth time, I was like, okay, this is awesome. And I've been, I haven't been knocking them back or whatever, but I've been drinking like a couple a week, you know, just kind of keeping it. I know that I'm going to end up giving some to you and some to some other friends. So like, I'm not worried about the whole 5 gallons that I brewed, but this ended up being pretty good. I was pretty happy
it really is. And it, I know we're drinking it now like in summer almost, but this is a really good, I can see it fitting well in like a holiday setting. Because, you get over for Christmas, you've got all those, like, pies and cakes, and this is, like I'm not sure I'd pair this with too many meals, but, I mean, it seems like it's that perfect after-dinner drink. You're going to have it with, like, a slice of pie or something like that.
It also goes pretty good with cheese.
Yeah,
like,
I can see that.
And not, like, sweet cheese, like cheddar or something like that. There's something
those sharpers,
about
those fatties.
The fat and this, like, really mix well together. The alcohol in it works
that's a
well.
good point because a lot of things get muted and changed when you get all that fat on your tongue, from like a hard cheese, and that could really like change that secondary flavor that comes off like initially all very like together and in like one profile. I bet if you like dull that down, they probably come out really well.
Yeah, you get more of the spice with the fat, I think. Or at least that's the way it seemed to me.
Yeah, well, I mean that's probably right? Like your taste buds get covered, everything's for lack of a better term, more muted. Your receptors spread out a little bit more because not as many are firing off. So I can definitely see that.
Yeah. So let's talk about what we brewed over the break. And I don't think you brewed anything, did you?
No, I actually don't think I did. I started on something, but I never. Delilah knocked it over, and I had to throw it out. Yeah, and that's the saddest part, I think, of what's like been my post-pandemic life. I got to spend a ton more time with my family, which is absolutely great. Love that part. But no real time to brew. Like, I get off of work, and then the next thing I do is hang out with my kid until she goes to bed, and then it's 8 o'clock, and I'm kind of too tired, and, like, we've been drinking a lot more alcohol. Well, no, I mean, like, even variety. So, like, that's one of the things we started doing is, like, buying bottles of stuff. And, I used to drink pretty much 80% the stuff I made, and like maybe 20% something else. And those were generally like hard liquors. Like I knew a lot more about good rums and things like that than I did like wine and beers. But I've got my wife into wine. We drink 1 or 2 bottles a week, depending on like what we bought. Like we bought like a Tarny Cream we're still in the fridge because it's like 18%. It's one of those fortified wines. That's all right. But I can't complain about a $9 bottle. But we've played around with a couple of things, and it's been real nice. I think it's helped my alcohol education, just maybe not my alcohol creativity in terms of getting to play with a lot of stuff.
But I mean, drinking. So that is a good point. Like drinking other people's stuff, like even mass-produced stuff, it can help your palate to develop in such a way that you taste new things when you go back to other things that you had before. I know that drinking wine. So I've drank liquor a lot, and then I drank wine, and I didn't love wine, and then I guess somewhere in my 30s my palate changed enough to where I started really liking wine and beer because I didn't love those things, and then suddenly I taste different things in whiskey and rum and other things like that. And so I think it really is like a super important thing to get a little bit of extra experience with those other alcohols if you're trying to like kind of taste stuff. And then when you start getting into like smoky or peaty whiskeys, or even like other alcohols that have some of those smoky flavors into them, having like a palate that you can kind of reference back to those sense memories really makes a big difference in being able to enjoy those things.
Yeah. It also gets you really prepared for how do certain flavors like manifest in alcohol. You know, you drink enough things, you kind of get a feel for like, okay, this is kind of what quote unquote cream tastes like in alcohol. Because we throw those names around a lot, like this tastes like apricots, this tastes like leather, this tastes like wood. And it's really, it doesn't taste like you just bit a piece of leather or you just ate an apricot. It's like those essences that are in it. So it can give you a better feeling for like, okay, these are the kind of flavors I like. This is what I'm going to aim for. Because I know especially really early when I was brewing things, I would throw in like, say, apples or cherries or raspberries. And I wouldn't really know what to expect when those came out. And I made some things that, especially early on, I didn't like. Because even though those things were in there, they didn't taste the way I thought they would.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having been brewing over thinking back when we first started brewing together, not you, because you were brewing a bit before I was. Some of the things that we did when we first started brewing, I didn't really understand what we were doing. And not that they were wrong, but they when we pulped those cherries, I didn't really understand what effect that had on the flavor and things like that. And I couldn't taste it I just knew I liked the mead that we make that was that kind of Viking blood mead, right? Like cherry. Well, it was pretty much a Viking blood clone, which I think I'm going to try to remake. And we should probably do it together.
Oh, yeah. That'd be a lot of fun. Recipe. Yeah.
But I think I've got some improvements to add to it now that I understand, and then I've got that sense memory to kind of go with it. And that is like a thing that you don't get if you don't get a breadth of other experiences. If you're just making stuff of your own, then you really don't get it. I'm really excited about letting you try the Ruder Appelig Honig. Is what we called it. We wanted to go with a Viking name, but I made basically an apple hibiscus mead.
Okay,
and I'm really excited for you to try that because it's pretty close, I think, to the cherry mead that we made without the cherries.
Okay,
or what we were going for with that.
Yeah.
And the malolactic fermentation that happened there is really it's a very mild mead. And there's some things that we didn't do that I kind of wish we had with that old brew because it would have made it more palatable when it came around to like doing a thing. So there's like some things that like I'm excited now that we can get together and brew some because I'm thinking like, oh, like I actually have some stuff that I've discovered that I'd love to like show you and how I'm doing it, like finding agents and things like that.
Yeah.
They aren't expensive. It's fairly easy to do.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Just have to put them in there, so. So you didn't brew much, but I've been brewing.
Oh yeah, you've been going crazy,
gangbusters. I have probably about 20 gallons of brew in the house just sitting around, and some things that we talked about last time that were really good that I think I've actually stepped up this time.
Okay,
and I've discovered some things from doing research and things like that. So. The hibiscus apple mead is one I just talked about, but let's talk about how I've been failing at Coffeemel, and I think that I've actually kind of figured out the trick to it.
Okay.
So before, do you remember how I was making my Coffeemels? Like I'd do a brew with coffee as the with a cold brew coffee as the like kind of
part of the base. Yeah.
Well. There are other ways to do that. Like people have like done hot brew coffee. They have added coffee beans to the must afterwards and things like that. So I decided to experiment with some other things because every time I've tried like the Coffeemel, I mean, you had it last time. It just wasn't like.
Yeah, it wasn't terrible, but it's really hard traditionally to get those flavors in like a homebrew setting.
Exactly. Well, so I did on the other thing that I'm doing, I did like a yeast starter versus yeast sprinkle kind of experiment to figure out what ends up happening if lower ABV is different than higher ABV.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening if you take a traditional mead that's about 1.1 gravity, so that's about 12, 13% ABV, and you start it with a yeast starter versus sprinkle, and you give them both the same amount of nutrients and both about the same amount of stuff. So all things considered equal, there's no difference between the two, basically.
Yeah.
But what am I going to do with those brews now? Because I've got 7 gallons of brew that I need to do something with. So I decided to try to take the Red Star one that I did and turn it into or one of the gallons of Red Star that I did, turn it into a coffee mill. So I put, because I'd seen someone do this in a beer where they're doing a coffee beer to impart some of those flavors. They put the coffee in at the end.
Yeah.
In secondary, like after they'd already done.
Yeah, do like an infusion more than like it's in there to brew the whole time. Yeah.
So I did that, and I don't know yet, but that seems like the most successful because it's gone dry. It's got all the right esters and things like that. I've got some of those orange flavors that I was trying to get with the orange honey, and there's a mixture of wildflower and orange blossom honey, but. I've tried to do that, and I think that's going to end up being pretty good. And if that works out well, that's the way I'm going to go from now on.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that working, because alcohol is an incredibly good solvent. So that post-alcoholic brew, it's already sitting at that, 12%, is going to extract those flavors directly from the beans a lot better than it would be if it was in primary the whole time. And the same fear you have with any spice, technically coffee is not a spice, but we're using it in the same way. We're trying to impart those flavors, is that you don't want to put in too much and you don't want to let them in there too long because they can give you too much. So having it in that secondary in a position that's already stable, already high ABV so it can age, and you don't have to worry as much as I can taste it every 2 or 3 days until it hits the level I like. I can definitely see there being some advantages to that.
And I'm probably going to bottle those next week. And they've been aging for a while, since last October.
Okay, yeah.
So we're June, May, June kind of time period.
Yeah.
So about 6 months in.
Yeah, that's a great aging time for meads as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. That might be one of the things that we try next week.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Next
time that we do something like that, because I should bottle them in the in-between of this. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about that.
I alluded to making some session meads. That's one of them that's sitting right there behind you, as a matter of fact. It was so vibrant in its, or vigorous, maybe is a better word. That it started off with a just regular, airlock, and it blew out. Oh yeah, blew into it. Was pour. Did it 3 times. Normally, after the second one, I'll put a tube in, and I didn't put one in, so I ended up putting the tube in.
Yep.
And then it still blew up into the tube, so I had to go back and clean it up a 4th time.
Oh yeah. Some of these meads, if you get the right nutrients in there with all that sugar, they just explode.
It did. I mean, but see, the weird thing is, after the 3rd time, it was still only half of the sugar had been eaten through. So I've had a couple of others that I've done that with, and they've just ate through the sugar in 2 days, 3 days.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the session mead is something I'm definitely getting into, because you can turn those around in about a month, and they're actually drinkable if you give them the right mixture of nutrient per each time you test. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the session mead ends up. Right now, it's still got the blueberries in it and everything. I'm trying to impart all those flavors, and then I'm going to move it over to a secondary bucket.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have a 2-gallon jug. I wish I had a 2-gallon jug, but I don't. So no glass.
You did touch on a good point, though, and that's one thing I'll stress to people making mead. Meads are one of those alcohols that people always say needs a really long aging time. Bare minimum 6 months, better if it's 2 years. Well, I haven't found that to be true if you get those nutrients in there.
Yep.
I think a lot of what makes mead take so long is that honey itself, very little nutrients in it apart from the sugar. So those yeast get really stressed and they make a lot of those off flavors that do come out eventually. But if you can keep those yeast happy, it doesn't take any longer aging time than like a really strong wine.
Yeah, it's very true. And with lower ABV, like 10% and less, you can have something that you can drink in like a week after it's
bottled. There's plenty of my things that I make that are in that like 9 to 11 range that some I'll just drink immediately. Definitely the stuff that's like sat around for a month a little bit better. But, since I almost exclusively make 5 gallons, sure, I'll go through the first gallon, but the second gallon's even better, then the third gallon's even better, And then by that point, there's not as much advantage. I don't age them in oak. I'll put them in like food safe grade containers, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you put like the I haven't been putting as much into the carboys that I have to age, like bulk age. I've still been really setting with bottle aging.
Yeah.
But I think that's going to be something I try next is putting some stuff in a carboy and just letting it set for like a year and then racking it over before I even touch it. But as awesome as that can be, and leaving stuff on like oak and things like that, having something that you can drink like almost immediately is also awesome too. So that's why I'm really interested in these session meads, because they're around that 8% ABV that I kind of like the mixture of alcohol and flavor with. Most things that are lower than that, they don't have enough of the like bitterness and other flavors that alcohol can
that
add.
acidity.
Yeah, that's the acidity or whatever it is. They don't have enough for me. So, then there's beer. I'm probably going to make another beer. So I've got a coffee stout and 1 gallon of coffee stout sitting right there behind you in those boxes, and 2 gallons of, I think, an Irish stout, if I remember correctly. Okay. That I'm going to try again. Now these are the LME or liquid malt extract like kits that you can buy, but they weren't very expensive. They were like $10 a gallon.
Oh yeah,
which isn't too bad. I mean, it's still more expensive than if I was doing it with grain. But I've had so many problems with getting grain to do right in my current beer brewing system that I've just switched to LME for a little bit, because I'm waiting until I buy a nice an anvil or something like that I can brew from.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, those kits are fun. I did a beer kit. Well, we did a beer kit together. It didn't turn out that great, but we did it. It really does. It puts that passion back in it if you're switching from something else. Like cider, super easy. Wine, for the most part, pretty easy. Mead, pretty easy. Beer, traditionally, is not. But the kit does a good way of like meeting you that halfway. It's a lot of fun to open up a kit. If you do it right, you still get really good alcohol out of it. And at a certain level, I think you need that experience. Because if you go straight to grain, like you're still just following somebody's recipe because you don't know enough about it yet to really be on your own. So I feel like starting straight with grain is almost making it harder on yourself, because you have to have the better technique to make the grain come out well while you're still having to follow word for word somebody else's recipe.
Yeah, that's very true. And there's some problems with my setup. Like my stove here does not get even a gallon of water to stay consistent temperature. So like it needs to stay at between 152 and 160. It'll wildly fluctuate and drop down to 145 and then go back up to 165, and I just can't keep it consistent. So I need something that keeps like a consistent temperature. And that's my biggest problem. Right?
Yeah, it's really hard to do stuff like that if you don't have like gas or induction. Yeah. Anything on coil or those like on and off burners like are at my place, that consistent temperature is brutal.
Yeah, well, these are not induction. It's a glass top, but it's got it'll come on and then it'll go off.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I have in my place too. Yeah. Those I don't even know what you technically call them. I just call them flash burners because they turn on real hot and they cool down.
Well, it's an electric coil. Is all it is. It's not even induction because it doesn't work with an induction.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, basically, I'm going to try to do all that stuff over the next maybe 3 or 4 months, and some of it I'll show on my Accidental Brewer channel, and maybe you'll even show up on that one. I don't know if you want to. Yeah.
Finally free to kind of move around a little bit.
That'll be awesome, and we can try some of this stuff some more over the next bit. So the last topic that I had for today was one that was kind of on video games. But we were so excited for Cyberpunk 2077 that we haven't had a chance to talk about some of the failures and some of the things that have actually gotten better. Because everybody talks about these things when they first come out. Yeah. And everybody's super hyped for it. Most people have played through it and stuff like that. But nobody really talks about it a year in or a year and a half in or something like that. And it's not quite a year in, yet since Cyberpunk 2077 was released. But we're still at a place where people are probably still playing this game. Now, I finished it. I know you have. Yeah. Right. So tell me your thoughts on the game now that you finished it, and maybe even going back. I've been going back and playing little bits and pieces of it. Yeah. I've got some disappointments, but I think that they're going to change in the same way that The Witcher 3 changed. Yeah,
that's kind of how I have to look at it, because Witcher 3 had some pretty significant problems when it first came out too. I was a little disappointed. The open world felt a little empty, even though it had a lot of stuff. There wasn't as much stuff as you could do. NPC AI was not great, and I think part of trying to tackle some of their technical issues, they those famous little videos where you shoot a gun in the air, you see the people in front of you, turn around, they're all gone, you turn back around, they're all gone, and they're just deleting stuff out of the world. Although the story had some pacing issues. It is good to see, though, that with subsequent patches, a lot of the technical issues have been fixed. Yeah. I'm not sure there's really much they can do to fix pacing, apart from maybe some of the DLCs might be integrated in certain parts of the story, which could really help. Because that first act is really big. Second act kind of in the middle. Third act really just sneaks up on you. Yeah. You started and you're just done. In fact, I missed some of the in-game content that my wife got, because with the way they do some of that in-game content, that it's almost on a timer. It's you did that first mission, they're going to call you back in a week. Well, if you've really played heavily the first 2 parts, there's actually not much available. I would, sit there and skip time for 3 or 4 days waiting for somebody to call me. And then I was okay, well, it's been 5-6 days. Nobody's called me. I guess we're done. And then my wife said, "Oh, did you do this mission?" I was when does that mission happen? Oh, that guy calls you. It's I waited for a week and that guy didn't call me yet. But I will say, I got to give credit where credit is due. A lot of the stuff that is there is very good. Combat's very good. Hacking takes a little while to get off the ground, but it's still very good. Unarmed combat is really fun until that very last mission. You kind of got to cheese that one. It's a little unfair how difficult that is. But I did hear, I haven't played it since they've done it, but I did hear in one of the more recent patches they rebalanced that particular mission. And I will say, I didn't, for as many technical issues there are, they didn't lead to glitches that were annoying outside of crashing things. There weren't a whole bunch of exploits. There weren't a whole bunch of you're cheesing the game doing this or that, except for some crafting things. I still want a real rebalance on crafting, which they had to do in Witcher 3 too. They didn't get the Witcher 3 crafting. They didn't get it perfect. Perfect the first time. But overall, I'm still pretty favorable on the game. But I have decided now that I've beat it the first time, I'm not going to play it again until kind of that first DLC comes out. Yeah. Because that's really when The Witcher turned around. It had its 1.1 patch, which fixed a lot of the technical problems. But it didn't have a lot of the missing features that people wanted until that first big DLC.
For me, The Witcher 3 didn't turn around until Save Game Plus. Mm-hmm. And that was a week or 2 before the first DLC dropped. Yeah. And I think this is going to be the same way. Probably. Cyberpunk needs that same sort of treatment where they release some DLCs that are, kind of the free expansions that we should have always gotten all the time.
Yeah, there's some gap fills they need to do.
And so one of my most disappointing things about Cyberpunk hasn't been the glitches, hasn't been any of the other problems that it has. It has been that the game pretty much just ends.
Yeah.
There's no, like, continuing to play after the end. You have to go back to a previous state.
Yeah, before you did that final part 3.
Right. And so, like, I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed everything that I did. I got a really good ending. I feel like it was satisfying and stuff like that. And I don't hate, you know, like that the game ended in that context, because there's some good things about a story ending and like that just kind of being the end. But for a video game, I also like to sometimes go back and play like a mission or something like that I didn't do previously, or like save a game in a certain spot and then go back. And I prefer to have some of those perks that I had gotten from like playing through the game. I'm looking forward to when they do that with this game, if they do that with this game.
Yeah, a new game plus sort of thing would be really fun, even if it was kind of limited.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. The in-game content, like I gotta say, even at a point that like it would be fun to keep playing when you ended it, but most of the time, by the time I go to that third one, or you know, there's just not a lot left. You've kind of done through the missions. It doesn't have that sort of like recurring, hey, here's some things that come up. It would be really nice if it had some sort of like contract system. You know, occasionally you just get like randomly generated jobs. Hey, there's these people in this warehouse.
That's
go
exactly
here.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because The Witcher 3 did something like that, where you got those randomly generated jobs that would happen. I think Cyberpunk has some things like that, but they're not as robust, and I would like to see that happen.
Yeah, there's like scenarios where you sometimes see like gangs fighting, but the problem is they're all identical and they're static on the map. Especially because I heavily played that first section because I wanted to level some stuff up before I like did that first, you know, the finale mission for part 1. And, you know, you could resolve something. I think the one that sticks out in my mind the most is where there's the cop and like 2 gang members that are talking. They're doing some sort of like trade deal. That just keeps happening.
Yeah.
You know, especially since I always took the approach to blow them away. So I like kill those 3 people. 5 minutes later, they're back.
Yep.
And they're doing the same thing. You grab their equipment. I think that's also a thing that I want to see improved is I think it was a very interesting choice. They went with like randomly dropped equipment with like static stats, and you can upgrade them, but it's incredibly costly as it moves over.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people were looking to make like a custom character with like a custom style and stick close to that style. The fact that they don't have things like item transmogrification, things like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that stuff's kind of cool, but I feel like that's more of like a Fallout thing. If you want that kind of game, you play a Bethesda game. You play Skyrim.
Sort of. But
Fallout.
with a crafting system like they do, I feel like at some level, like, oh, I got an item, I should be able to break it down for a recipe. And then, oh, did I find this really cool trench coat? But it's like a common item. It's not very good. I'd love to break it down and be able to make like a legendary version of it. Things like that. And, you know, I won't get too into crafting because I was, at one hand, very disappointed with it. On the other hand, some parts of it are actually very good.
Yeah.
The like crafting for standard items like armor and weapons, pretty poor in my opinion. But the crafting when I did like I only beat it once, but I got like most of the way through a second run where I did like just pure hacker. The way they did crafting for the quick hacks was actually very nice.
Pretty awesome, right?
It was much better than the crafting for the standard items.
Right.
So like, you know,
they've modified that a little bit in the last couple of patches too.
Yeah, I know they've done some balancing on it and things like that.
That ended up being pretty awesome though. So yeah, you got anything else you want to say about that?
Not really. Overall, I would say I like it much better now than I did originally, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah. All right. So that is the season 4, episode 2 of the Beer and Broadband podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We've got all sorts of things in store for season 4, so hope to have you come in a little bit later and catch those episodes also. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you later.